The house was buzzing, but not in the warm, effortless way I'd hoped. Mum's 50th birthday was supposed to be a celebration of life, laughter, and the rare alignment of our 6 siblings under one roof. Yet a subtle tension clung to the air like an uninvited guest. I stepped out of the car, cradling our 2-year-old, and immediately felt the contrast between our family's excitement and the undercurrents of unease. My husband followed closely behind, holding a small bag with a few essentials for our daughter, and I felt a surge of gratitude for him, always reliable, always calm, always on my side. But even his presence couldn't entirely smooth over the subtle frostiness radiating from my sister, who stood near the porch, arms crossed, her expression unreadable, as if she had already decided she wasn't going to enjoy herself. It wasn't unusual for my sister to be moody, especially given the roller coaster of her past year. Her divorce had finalized earlier in the year, and I knew it had hit her harder than she let on. Yet the way she interacted with everyone, including my husband, felt sharper than normal, and I found myself flinching at her words, anticipating their edge before they even left her mouth. As we walked inside, the familiar smells of home Mum's lavender-scented candles, the faint aroma of her signature roast, and the warm, comforting scent of fresh-baked bread mixed oddly with the tension, creating a strange dichotomy between nostalgia and discomfort. Our siblings were already mingling, my older brother leaning lazily against the kitchen counter, my youngest sister perched on a stool, scrolling through her phone, and my other siblings scattered about, each absorbed in their own conversations. The rare sight of all 6 of us together was heartwarming, but the undercurrent of unresolved issues hovered just beneath the surface, as if waiting for a spark. My sister hovered nearby, her gaze flicking between me and my husband with a mix of irritation and indifference, occasionally muttering sarcastic comments under her breath that made my stomach knot. I tried to ignore it, telling myself this was her process, her way of coping with her divorce, but the tension was palpable. Dinner was a quiet affair at first, with Mum encouraging conversation and laughter, trying to stitch together the frayed edges of our family's mood. I noticed my sister's eyes roll at nearly every mention of my husband, and each glance toward me felt pointed, like a silent accusation that I wasn't supposed to exist in her presence with someone she perhaps envied or resented. I tried to engage her gently, asking about her life and her plans post-divorce, but she offered clipped responses that only increased the discomfort. My husband, ever perceptive, noticed my subtle frustration and squeezed my hand under the table, a small gesture that reminded me I wasn't alone in this. Later, after dinner, my younger brother, the youngest of the 6 of us, only 20, with boundless energy and the kind of optimism that can fill a room, suggested a group activity, hiking the trails behind our parents' property. It was meant to be light-hearted, a way to reconnect with nature and each other, and for a moment I felt the weight lift slightly. My sister's eyes lit up briefly, and she turned to me, asking if I wanted to join. That's when reality hit like a cold splash of water. I had a toddler in tow, my husband was working that day, and the thought of hiking with a cranky 2-year-old seemed less like an adventure and more like an endurance test. "I think I'll stay," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral, careful not to provoke her. "I'll stay with husband's name and daughter's name." Her reaction was instantaneous. A sharp exhale, an almost imperceptible scoff, but it carried all the weight of disapproval. "God, how fucking codependent can you be with each other?" she snapped, her voice a mixture of incredulity and scorn. X's name and I were never so attached at the hip. The words landed hard, a sting I hadn't expected. For a split second, I was tempted to apologize or laugh it off, but something inside me refused. This wasn't about codependence. It was about basic choices, about what felt right for me and my family in that moment. I responded evenly, though I could feel the adrenaline spike in my chest. "Maybe that's why she's divorced," I said, my voice calm but firm, and turned away, lifting my daughter into my arms and retreating toward the living room. The room seemed to pause, as though the air itself had thickened, everyone sensing the sharp crack in the otherwise festive evening. Later that night, my sister sent me a long, meticulously crafted text. It was filled with emotion, accusation, and judgment, outlining how rude and callous I had been to mention her divorce, how I had hurt her, how I had failed as a sister. I read the message once, twice, feeling the burn of her words, but also a sense of vindication, because I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, had simply chosen to prioritize my child and my husband over a hike. My parents remained neutral, refusing to get involved, perhaps wisely. The other siblings largely stayed out of it, except my younger brother, who offered a small comment that while I was right, perhaps ignoring her would have been the calmer path. My husband, as always, stood by my side, reinforcing that my choices were valid, that my response was justified, and that my sister's reaction was hers alone to manage, even in the quiet moments. As I rocked my daughter to sleep that night, the echoes of the confrontation lingered. I found myself replaying the words, dissecting the tension, and wondering about family dynamics, the unspoken rules, the expectations, and the invisible threads that bind us together yet so easily unravel under stress. The warmth of home, of celebration, was interlaced with the jagged edges of confrontation, and I realized that while we gathered to honor my mother's milestone, we were also navigating the complex terrain of past hurts, sibling rivalry, and the fragile lines of empathy and judgment. I spent that night thinking about the thin line between standing firm and being unkind, and about the weight of words, especially when wielded in moments of heightened emotion. My sister's pain was evident, yes, but my own priorities, my child, my husband, my peace were equally valid. I understood that family gatherings are often more than celebrations. They are mirrors reflecting unresolved issues, long-standing resentments, and the ways we struggle to balance empathy with self-preservation. By the next morning, the house felt different, charged with unspoken tensions. Breakfast was quieter, the air still taut with the echoes of yesterday's confrontation. My sister avoided me, focused instead on her phone, her breakfast, and the occasional pointed remark to others. I focused on my daughter, pouring coffee for my husband, and maintaining a calm center, knowing that my presence and choices mattered more than the fleeting judgments cast by those still caught in their own. Despite the storm brewing just beneath the surface, moments of genuine connection emerged. Small conversations, shared smiles, laughter from the youngest siblings, and the comforting presence of my husband reminded me that even amidst tension, family can offer warmth and grounding. But it was clear that dynamics were shifting, lines had been drawn, and this reunion, so rare and so precious, would be remembered not only for Mom's milestone, but for the subtle battles waged quietly between sibling bonds and personal boundaries. The morning after the dinner, the atmosphere in the house was taut, like a wire pulled tight. My sister avoided me, of course, but there was a tension in the air that made every movement feel exaggerated, every glance loaded. Our little household, my husband, our daughter, and I tried to maintain our routines, but the larger family dynamic always intruded. My younger brother, the instigator of yesterday's hiking suggestion, was already bouncing around the living room with his usual energy, trying to break the ice and lighten the mood. He leaned toward me, whispering, "I don't get why she's being so harsh." "You didn't do anything wrong?" I smiled weakly and shrugged, knowing that while I appreciated his support, the emotional waves my sister was sending across the room weren't something I could simply walk around or ignore. When my sister finally approached, it was with the deliberate stiffness of someone determined to make every interaction uncomfortable. She looked at me with what I can only describe as a mixture of contempt and wounded pride. "I can't believe you said that last night," she muttered, barely above a whisper, throwing my divorce in my face. "That's," she trailed off, shaking her head as if words themselves could never convey the depth of her disapproval. I kept my face neutral, replying only with a quiet, "I said what I felt was necessary," and left it at that. My daughter tugged at my sleeve, pulling me away, and I was grateful for the distraction. Later, my younger brother renewed the hiking suggestion, trying to rally everyone, but my sister had already voiced her intentions. She would go, and she wanted me to come along. "Do you want to come?" she asked, her tone neutral, almost polite, but the underlying tension was undeniable. I shook my head. "No, I'll stay with husband's name and daughter's name. It'll be fine. You go ahead." And then it happened. Her response was sharp, instant, cutting through the room's fragile calm. "God, how fucking codependent can you be with each other?" she exclaimed, louder this time, making sure everyone heard. The words hung in the air, a mix of accusation and disbelief, and all eyes turned to me. My heart raced, not because I feared confrontation, but because the room had suddenly transformed into a stage, with each of us playing roles in a drama I hadn't signed up for. Her words were jabs, but I refused to let them dictate my reaction. I took a deep breath, holding my daughter a little closer, and said softly but firmly, "Maybe that's why she's divorced." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't mock or belittle. I simply stated the truth as I saw it. The truth that my sister's constant comparisons and judgments were hurtful and, frankly, misguided. The fallout was immediate. My sister's face twisted into an expression of shock and outrage. She didn't reply verbally at first, simply spinning on her heel and retreating to another room. It wasn't long before my phone buzzed with her lengthy text. I read it slowly, carefully, almost savoring each word. She described, in excruciating detail, how rude and callous I had been, how I had hurt her deeply by mentioning her divorce, and how I had failed as a sister. There was a sharpness to the writing that reflected not only anger, but vulnerability, a mix of emotions that seemed to twist together into something almost unrecognizable. I considered responding immediately, explaining myself, justifying my words, but the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that no reply could bridge the gap at that moment. My husband, ever the voice of reason, reminded me, "You didn't do anything wrong. You were honest, and you protected your family. That's all that matters." His support was a lifeline, a reminder that even as family drama swirled around me, my core values and priorities remained intact. I didn't reply to the text immediately. Instead, I took the time to walk around the house with my daughter, observing the small moments that kept life moving despite conflict. My sister remained in her room for a while, retreating from the rest of the household. When she emerged, the air was still charged. Our parents maintained their neutral stance, offering no intervention, perhaps wisely avoiding taking sides in what had clearly become a complicated and emotionally charged situation. Other siblings hovered at the edges of the drama, offering small observations here and there. My younger brother's gentle attempt to mediate suggestion I might have simply ignored her was appreciated, but ultimately felt inadequate. It was clear that this was a personal conflict, one that required self-awareness, boundaries, and emotional clarity more than outside arbitration. Throughout the day, I reflected on the dynamics at play. My sister's words were harsh, and her reaction seemed disproportionate. Yet I recognized the underlying pain, the insecurity, and the vulnerability that divorce can exacerbate. At the same time, I was aware of the importance of boundaries, of the need to protect my daughter and husband, and of the right to make decisions that felt right for my immediate family. I realized that sometimes, even in the closest of families, choices that prioritize self-care and healthy attachment can be perceived as threats or criticisms by others navigating their own struggles. By late afternoon, I had settled into a rhythm with my daughter. We played quietly in the living room, built towers with blocks, and watched her giggle at the simplest of things. The normalcy of these moments stood in sharp contrast to the emotional intensity swirling elsewhere. My husband joined us when he was free from work, reinforcing the sense of security and stability. Despite the undercurrents, I found a certain peace in these small, private moments of connection, understanding that family dynamics are often complex, and resolution does not always come in dramatic gestures, but in quiet, consistent choices. The hiking incident became a focal point for the rest of the day. Conversations were stilted, interactions measured, and while my sister continued to send messages expressing her displeasure, I chose not to engage in extended arguments. The balance of empathy and self-preservation became central to my approach, a reminder that sometimes protecting your own emotional well-being is not only acceptable, but necessary. As evening approached, I reflected on the delicate interplay between honesty and tact, between familial obligation and personal boundaries. My sister's accusations were loud, and their impact undeniable, but I knew that my response, firm and grounded in my priorities, was appropriate. The situation was not perfect, nor had it been handled without friction, but it was real, authentic, and guided by the needs of my own family. The day ended with quiet reflection. My daughter asleep, my husband beside me. I allowed myself a moment to consider the complexities of sibling relationships, the balance between support and interference, love and criticism, empathy and judgment. I recognized that while my sister's pain was valid, my right to prioritize my family and maintain my boundaries was equally so. The day after the hiking incident, the house carried a strange weight, an invisible tension that seemed to linger even in the quietest corners. My sister's retreat into herself had not softened her anger. Instead, it felt like a simmering presence, radiating silently through the rooms. I kept to my usual routines with my daughter, knowing that stability was paramount for her, and that my husband's support would be my anchor against the storm of judgment that hovered around me. Each small smile from my toddler, each gentle squeeze of my husband's hand, reminded me that despite familial friction, I had a sphere of warmth and security I could control. I found myself reflecting on the confrontation repeatedly. Was I too blunt? Had my words about her divorce crossed a line? Yet the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that my response had not been cruel or unwarranted. It was a simple acknowledgement of boundaries, a defense of my family's right to exist without criticism. My sister's reaction, though intense, was her own emotional response, a mixture of hurt, insecurity, and perhaps envy that I could not manage for her. Understanding this distinction between responsibility for another's emotions and responsibility for one's own actions became a central theme in my reflection. Throughout the day, other siblings moved cautiously around the tension. My younger brother continued to offer subtle support, reinforcing that I had acted reasonably, even if he suggested a more passive approach might have been calmer. The rest of the family maintained a polite neutrality, neither confronting my sister nor taking sides, which, in a way, helped contain the situation. The lack of intervention emphasized that family dynamics are rarely black and white. We must navigate them with both empathy and clarity, understanding that each individual carries their own burdens and unresolved conflicts. Later, my sister approached me again, her demeanor calmer but still guarded. She attempted a conversation, softening her earlier rigidity. "I'm still upset about what you said," she admitted quietly, "but I guess I just feel fragile right now." Her vulnerability was evident, a reminder that behind anger often lies pain. I responded gently, acknowledging her feelings without compromising my own. "I understand that you're hurting. I'm not trying to hurt you either. I'm just protecting my family and our choices." The exchange, brief and careful, was a small bridge over the chasm of tension, a tentative step toward understanding without concession. As the evening progressed, our parents gathered everyone in the living room for a moment of celebration, reminding us of why we were together in the first place. Mum's eyes sparkled with joy, her voice warm and inclusive, and for a moment, the earlier discords seemed almost distant. We laughed, shared stories, and reminisced about childhood memories, the familiar cadence of family life, smoothing over the rough edges of conflict. Even amidst tension, the fundamental bonds remained. A reminder that love and shared history persist despite disagreements and misunderstandings. I found time alone with my husband, and we spoke quietly about the day's events. He reiterated that my choices had been justified, that protecting my daughter and preserving our family's peace was paramount, and that my sister's reaction, while emotionally charged, was not my responsibility. His perspective offered clarity, reinforcing that accountability for my own actions does not extend to managing the emotional responses of others. It was a lesson in emotional boundaries, one that I would carry forward not just in this incident, but in all future familial interactions. The following days were a mixture of cautious reconciliation and continued reflection. My sister gradually re-engaged with the family, her interactions less charged but still tinged with residual hurt. We spoke in small increments, conversations marked by careful listening, measured responses, and a mutual effort to acknowledge pain without escalating conflict. Through these exchanges, I realized that family relationships are rarely resolved in dramatic gestures. Rather, they are built, rebuilt, and repaired through countless small moments of communication, patience, and understanding. I spent time journaling my thoughts, attempting to process the emotional turbulence. The experience had underscored the importance of standing firm in one's values, protecting one's immediate family, and maintaining empathy for others' pain without allowing it to dictate one's own emotional landscape. I reflected on the delicate balance between honesty and tact, between empathy and self-preservation, and the necessity of clear boundaries in maintaining both personal well-being and family harmony. Ultimately, I concluded that I was not in the wrong. My choice to stay with my husband and daughter was entirely reasonable, and my response to my sister, though pointed, was grounded in truth and self-respect. I acknowledged her pain, yet maintained my boundaries, understanding that the path to resolution often requires patience, emotional clarity, and acceptance that not all conflicts will be fully resolved in the moment. Family, after all, is a complex tapestry woven from both love and friction, and navigating it demands both courage and compassion. By the time we left my parents' house, the air had shifted subtly. There were no grand gestures of reconciliation, no dramatic apologies, just a quiet, mutual understanding that boundaries had been set, priorities clarified, and relationships maintained with honesty. My sister and I exchanged brief, civil smiles, a silent acknowledgement of our shared history and tentative steps toward repair. My husband and daughter by my side, I felt grounded, reassured that I had acted with integrity, and confident in my ability to navigate the complexities of family life without compromising my own values. Looking back on the incident, I understood that the judgment of others, even family, is not a measure of one's right or wrong. What mattered most was acting with integrity, maintaining emotional clarity, and prioritizing the well-being of those entrusted to my care. The hiking incident, though seemingly minor, had illuminated the intricate dynamics of family, the importance of personal boundaries, and the power of calm, deliberate response in the face of conflict. In the end, I realized that sometimes standing firm is the truest expression of love for oneself, for one's immediate family, and for the potential of healthier, more respectful future interactions.